Thanks so much, for all to you, Mark, and to Celia, to Crystal, for having me here to represent a bit of the voice of the end user among these hardware providers. And the first thing I want to start with is just a little bit of what motivates end users to invest in quantum computing, invest their resources, time, et cetera. And really, it comes down to this. We see investment across the board, but it's especially concentrated and acute in industries like finance, pharma, materials, that in some ways have failed to keep pace with market returns because of the absence or the want of a technology platform to drive growth, like tech and in other places. And so what's happened in these industries is that discovery, innovation, and value creation is somewhat thwarted by rising costs in the absence of major tech innovations. Pharma, for example, it's 3 times the cost to discover a drug as it was just 20 years ago. Banks, in finance, it's higher cost of equity than return on equity for most banks, and 60% of European banks. And then in EV batteries, obviously, which are a really promising technology, demand outpaces supply by a factor of 10 these days. So these are some of the reasons that that people are looking for next gen compute platforms, and quantum computing is really the prime example, top of mind for many of our customers when it comes to this. And so I guess 2 sort of phenomena I think that are worth noting about customer interest in quantum computing, even in the last, say, 6 to 12 months. One is that it's getting pretty broad. So you see a set of industries here, but we get outreach from all sorts of folks. I mean, recently the head of a major national fitness chain asked me about optimization use cases for scheduling optimization. It may not work out, but I think that the point is that it's really interesting, and actually it's a great indicator that we're getting this kind of interest really from across the board for the kind of quantum interested. The other thing I would want to note is that in these kind of core industries where there are sort of well-established use cases, the interest is just getting deeper and deeper. Nowhere more so than in finance, where you'll see that finance companies are hiring directly to address a number of many of these use cases here. And this is, we've listed 15, 20 use cases here, but there are any number that are under active exploration by the likes of JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Barclays, et cetera. And I think the thing that I want to mention, more so than the use cases themselves, is just kind of what the process typically looks like in terms of activating quantum computing at these companies across industries. And it's really kind of a sell, skill, and scale kind of process. The first thing that typically happens is that you need to secure some level of executive support, whether it's funding, whether it's a regular cadence that helps keep research the capability forward. The second is skilling, and that's really building a capability. Sometimes, as I mentioned in the finance case, it's by directly onboarding folks. Sometimes it's upskilling folks that you have in-house already. And then oftentimes it's done through partnership. And that last piece, scale, is an important part of what we're doing as well, because you really need to scale the rate and pace and breadth of your experimentation with quantum computers, which of course requires increasing attention on vendor selection. And so I think that this, like number 2 and number 3, the skill and the scale phase, are really ideal sites of partnership with quantum tech providers, like the ones that we've just heard descriptions of today. And when I think the last thing I wanted to kind of focus on is when we think about partnerships, we're often asked as BCG, well, who do I focus on now at this point? And it's a great thing. There's a set of potential providers, and how do we choose which one? There's an answer kind of for investors that's slightly different. But when end users ask us that, there are kind of the tried and true kind of like holy trinity of things that we say to look for. The one is, of course, talent, right? And you want to really find a team, at the provider level that is talented. You want to find a team that has an ambitious and yet credible technical roadmap. That's all important. And then I think increasingly, and companies are getting better and better at this, and I mean providers are getting better and better at this, you want folks that can offer onboarding, upskilling, various kind of capabilities that really facilitate not just access to the compute, but actually that capability building. The last one that I think is becoming really important is benchmarking. As we approach a period in which quantum computers are actually kind of sidling up toward quantum advantage, where they'll be able to do real things, beyond the capabilities of simulators and beyond the capabilities of classical computers, companies are asking us from a vendor selection perspective, well, how do we benchmark these things? Systems benchmarks are fairly well entrenched, and of course, quantum volume may be the most cited one. But we are finding, and that works really well, of course, for investors, and it works well for very sophisticated users of the technology. But as the kind of pool of users expands, we think that there's going to be, and there's already, this is already a bit nascent, increasing focus on application benchmarks, which answers questions like, okay, well, I am a pharma company, so what quantum computing physical implementation works best for Hamiltonian simulation, say? Or I'm an investment bank, and so I have a kind of linear algebra focused problem. And so we think that application benchmarks are, just as they did in classical computing, coming more and more important as a way to determine who the ideal partner is for these end users.